Hello, it's Kirsten, and Julie is with me today.
Hi, everybody.
And we have brought you out again, outside, and today is our owl class. So we're going to talk about owls. We're going to introduce how they're a raptor. We're going to talk about special adaptations that owls have. And then we're going to take you on an owl walk in the redwoods. So we're going to start with, what is a raptor? So all raptors are predatory birds that hunt and eat live food. And they have three features as standard equipment. They have powerful vision, they have sharp talons to grasp and kill their prey, and a hook beak then to tear it apart and eat with. Many raptors have other tools for catching prey, and owls have special super raptor features that we're going to talk about.
If I was to ask you to name some different types of raptors, I know you would come up with some of these names, things like ospreys and hawks and eagles. There is more than one kind of raptor in the world, and the difference in them, as you can see in these pictures, is the size and shape of their wings and their tail. So, what would you think would be a fast flying bird? Wide tail or narrow tail? It's a narrow tail. Same thing with the wings. Long, narrow wings are very streamlined and make them fly very, very fast. So that determines where they can live and what they can eat. And here is an example of a wing and a tail of a raptor. This happens to be from a red-shouldered hawk. So named that if I turn the wing over, you see the reddish color where it joins the body at what we would call our shoulder. It's a very spotted hawk. They live along the Carmel River. You may have seen them before. And here's the tail. And they're able to control the feathers and the movement. I'm going to have Kirsten actually open and shut this tail. Come on over here. Right now it's closed up as if it would be streamlined. So let's see what happens if a bird wants to hover high in the sky. It opens it up and makes it a much wider tail for holding itself up and just not even having to flap its wings. So these are all called adaptations. And that's really what our class is about today, is the amazing adaptations of owls. Owls are a really special kind of raptor because they hunt at night. We have 18 species of owls in North America, and all but 4 are nocturnal. So let's look at what makes them special and unique. First of all, they have that amazing eyesight that is better than the daytime hunters because they can see well in low light. So let's look at the skull of a great horned owl, the largest of all of our local owls, to get an idea of how important eyesight is to them and what it takes to have that amazing night vision. Look at the size of the eyes in this tiny skull. The great horned owl is the largest of our local owls, but when you take away the feathers, look how small it really is. But the eyes are the size of ours. So they need to have those eyes be that big in order to see well in low light and to be able to focus well, because that's one of the ways they find their food. And since their eyes are so big, they can't move their eyes like we can. And wherever you're sitting right now, look up and down and side to side with your eyes without moving your head. An owl, in order to look side to side, has to move its entire head, and to look up, it has to tilt everything. It all has to go. The eyes can't move. And that's why owls look a little spooky, that they can turn their head all the way around to the back and part way the other way, which is weird. Our necks don't do that. They obviously have very special kinds of spines to do that. Another really amazing adaptation of owls is their sense of hearing. They can hear better than almost any creature on Earth. In fact, someone who did an experiment put an owl in a room completely black with mice, and the owls had no trouble finding the mice. It wasn't their eyesight, it was their hearing. These big holes on the side of their head are their ear cavities. We have a flap, they just have a hole. We don't see it because it's covered with a thin layer of feathers. And you can see that one ear cavity is higher than the other in some of the owls. And there's an amazing reason for that, which we'll come back to in a second. So in order to collect sound, the actual design of an owl's feathers is in a circle around its eyes. And it's like a satellite dish that we use to collect the sound for our televisions. That ring of feathers is the collecting sound and bringing it to the ears, which are just on the side of that dish. Another amazing things about owls is their feathers. All birds have feathers, but they have unique feathers in that They are very soft on the edge. Instead of being a straight, hard line, it's kind of ruffled looking. Each little piece is a different length. And so that when these feathers move through the air, it doesn't make a sound. Like you may have heard a bird taking off before, making a whoosh, whoosh, whoosh sound. Owls have silent flight. So I want you to think about that for a second. Why would that be useful? Because every adaptation is for a reason. Okay, we're standing in a forest. I don't know if you can hear the sound of the wind in the trees or the birds that are singing in the background. If you were a barn owl, these would be extremely loud sounds. They have the best hearing of all the owls and owls. So let's talk a little more about how that works. Their brains actually process sounds more than pictures. We remember pictures. Sounds aren't our primary sense that we use. But owls have an auditory memory, and when sound comes to them in waves, and it takes time for sound to travel. So if you have one ear cavity higher than the other, the sound travels at a different speed, and they take that information on the time that it gets to one ear cavity, the time it gets to the other, they process that in their brain, and then they can pinpoint exactly where that sound came from. And one of the most amazing things I've learned about owls is that they can hear a mouse's heartbeat 3 feet under snow.
So because of this combination of adaptations, the amazing hearing that owls have because of their unique ears and the feather alignment, and combination of the adaptations of their feathers for silent flight, they can hunt at night so that the prey doesn't hear them coming, and the sound of their own wings doesn't interfere with their own ability to hear the prey.
Finishing off the unique characteristics of owls that allow them to be such incredible nighttime hunters, we have how camouflaged their feathers are. They can blend in with a tree, which if you think about it, if they're hunting at night, they're sleeping during the day, and if you're in a tree, you don't want to be bothered by those pesky small birds, so they just blend into the color of the bark. Can you see the screech owl? If his eyes were closed, it would be much harder. Owl beaks go back as far as their eyes in order to open large enough to swallow their prey whole. So with even sharper beaks than our daytime raptors and even sharper, longer talons, I like to call the owls super raptors. They are incredible nighttime hunters.
Biodiversity. We have high biodiversity here because we have so many different kinds of plants and animals that live in Potrero Canyon.
That high biodiversity means that we have excellent habitat for owls. Let's go on a virtual nature walk and see what we can learn about owls here. Our first stop is going to be in the redwood grove, which is right behind our picnic tables in our teaching area. We know that this is a very good home for owls because sometimes we see them when we look up into the trees, especially the barn owl with its white face.
We're inside of the redwoods, and look what we found. There are owl pellets all over the ground. Have you ever seen so many, Julie? You can see the jaw, a skull, and a tooth.
So that is most likely the skull of a wood rat. It's a fairly big skull for a rodent. We're going to talk more about wood rats today. Look at that. We have almost a full skeleton of a wood rat. So those were taken from an owl pellet, just like we showed you.
Here we have a wood rat's nest, and you can see how thick the bark is of this very old redwood. It's so thick that pieces of it pop off, and a rat has pulled branches of redwoods in there and made a nest.
In the owl pellets in Potrero Canyon, we have found the skulls of mice, a couple of birds, and quite a few wood rats. So that tells us what the prey items of our barn owls are. And here is another way to find where the owls are hanging out.
An owl sat on a branch right above this, and this is called whitewash. It is basically owl scat.
Now let's go up the canyon and see if we can find out where there's some other owls and learn about their habitat. How is it that they're able to make their homes here? There must be food for them, and there must be food for the things they eat. So we're going to look now at the food web of the owls that live in Potrero Canyon. It's complicated. The creek is quite noisy as we walk upstream. It is springtime, and after some heavy March rains, it's lovely to see our creek flowing. We also have lots of homes for owls, so we're going to look for those too. The grass that covers our fields and hills in the winter has gotten very tall, and at the very top you can see the flowers, which become the seeds of the grass plants. That is an amazing food source for so many creatures, including our rodents like mice and our birds and many of our insects. So we have a very large food source that's all ready for these creatures to eat right now in spring. And you might recognize the white flowers of the wild blackberry. Of course, we know what the seed is of the blackberry because we eat them, as well as, once again, the birds, the rodents, mammals. There are so many examples of food. Here are the berries of the fuchsia flowering gooseberry, spiny but very edible. And then the trees make food also. Here are the seeds of the maple tree. Wandering up the trail, look, we've come across some large oak trees. Oaks have holes quite often where a branch breaks off or there's rot, and those make excellent homes for some of our smaller owls. The smallest type of owl that lives in Potrero Canyon is the northern pygmy owl. They are only about 6 to 7 inches tall. Imagine holding one on your hand. Let's listen to them. You might have heard one before. In fact, they are so mighty that they can carry away a prey item, something that they want to eat, 3 times their size. And they often will eat just the brains of birds. They are small but very aggressive. Along with birds and small rodents, they also eat a lot of bugs. Here's one with a grub in its mouth. And we have many different kinds of insects in Potrero Canyon, including caterpillars. They'll also occasionally eat a lizard. Let's wander up the trail a bit. Oh, we get to cross the muddy spot on our little bridge, which is made from a tree cut in half. In early spring, it's often quite wet here. And we're approaching the sycamore trees. They are very large trees that grow near water, and a lot of them have broken branches that make cavities. Let's see if we can find any other owls here. It is very unusual to see owls, primarily because they are nocturnal, but also because they live in holes in trees. Kirsten and I have been very lucky over the years to get to watch a screech owl living in the hole that you see on the top right of this sycamore tree. A branch broke off and made a cavity, and this particular owl loved to sit in the sun in the morning when we taught our classes. We have a few pictures that show this owl sitting there. Let's listen to the sound of the screech owl while I tell you about it. Here's our little friend sitting in the cavity enjoying the sun. It always had its eyes closed. You can see that it has feather tufts that look like ears, like a great horned owl. It's only 8 inches tall, so just about an inch taller than our tiny little pygmy owl. And like the pygmy owl, it eats fairly small food. It eats insects, it eats small birds, it eats small rodents. But they like to live in the oak forest primarily and at the edge of the forest, not the deep forest. And they are hunting at night at the same time as our Monterey salamanders are out, so that is also a food source for them. Heading up the trail, I see the bridge, which is a place where we have great horned owls. Let's listen to the sound of the great horned owl while we approach its home. They don't go into a cavity like our smaller owls. They just pick a flat place in a tree or an old abandoned nest. They are the largest of all of our owls at 22 inches, so much bigger than the owls we've talked about, and they are voracious predators. Their prey includes something as large as a jackrabbit, as well as all of the rodents. They eat skunks because they do not have a sense of smell. They eat some of our larger birds like geese, ducks, and pigeons, and they are a predator of all of the other owls. After they have captured their prey with their extremely long and sharp talons, it doesn't take them long to eat it. Let's watch a great horned owl in action. Do you notice it was a head first, tail last? Didn't take long, and then they would be on their way to go find more food. Continuing up the trail, we pass our beautiful fairy circle, a circle of old redwoods. We climb and climb and climb until we come to a clearing above the trees. Our burrowing owl lives in holes, often an abandoned ground squirrel hole, and they are about 9 inches tall, so still quite small. They have quite long legs and they hunt during the day, so that makes them very different from our other owls. Because we humans also use open areas for things like cities, roads, golf courses, they're not doing very well, and they are a threatened species. We have very few burrowing owls left in California. Now we are going to return down the hill, back through the oak trees to where the redwoods are, because we're going to visit the home of the rarest of all the owls we're going to talk about today, the spotted owl, that lives only in old growth, dense forests. And in our area, they live in the redwood trees. The spotted owl is about 19 inches tall, so it is one of our largest owls. It is strictly nocturnal. It's living in the dense redwood forest, where it's hunting for the dusky-footed wood rats and the mice, some insects, and an occasional bat. They have an unusual call. I describe it as sounding like a barking dog. They do not sound like a typical hoot, hoot, hoot owl at all. They don't like to be hot, so they will move up and down the redwood trees according to the weather. On a particularly hot day, they might even go into the creek to cool down. They are known to be a very trusting owl. Here we can see a spotted owl at night on the hunt, and its prey, a mouse, running in terror. And last but not least, also living in the redwoods is the barn owl. The barn owl that we see the most often. Listen to the sound that it makes. Perhaps it should be called the screech owl. Like the other owls, they eat rodents, birds, insects, but they will also eat bats. And the parents will teach their babies to eat particular foods. So they may specialize in just 3 or 4 different types of food. They are called barn owls because they do like to have a roof over their heads. They don't have waterproofing in their feathers, so they want to stay dry. So they'll be in a crevice in the rocks or in a thick bunch of trees with cover over them. As we set off down the trail back to where we started, I want to tell you about an amazing book called Wesley the Owl by Stacy O'Brien. I highly recommend this book. It's one of the most enjoyable books I've ever read. These are some of the things she learned about Wesley. She raised him from when he was 1 day old, and she had him until he was 19 years old. She worked for Caltech Institute, and they were studying barn owls. She found out that Wesley the Owl was extremely intelligent and had a very strong personality. He was very sensitive, and he could not be disciplined, but he was extremely playful. Barn owls are one of the only birds that play their entire life. He would make up games, and he loved to play in water, even though supposedly barn owls do not like water. If owls get very upset, they can just die from sadness. They can die if their mate dies. They can die if they're just really, really upset. So they feel much stronger emotions than we do. When he was a few months old, he recognized specific words and phrases, and she described him as a kitten with wings, always very curious and playful. Wesley considered her to be his mate, and he would offer her mice. Interesting to look into the lives of a barn owl. They're so different from us, but they have strong feelings, and they have a very difficult life. Only 1 out of 15 barn owls that is born in 1 year lives to be 1 year old. One of their greatest hazards is running into a car because they do fly low when they're out hunting, and they get confused by the noise and the lights. Sometimes they run into power lines, and the biggest problem is habitat loss. And here's one last thought about owls. Some of the Southern California native tribes believe that owls were sent to guide us through dark places as our friends. I hope you've enjoyed learning about owls today. They have incredible adaptations that allow them to live in the nighttime world and find food and be safe in their homes and raise their babies. So we'll leave you now with a final few pictures of Wesley the owl as a baby and say goodbye to the Tularcitos 4th graders. We've seen you through the years, starting many of you in kindergarten, and this is the last time you'll be coming to one of our classes unless we should happen to see you in high school. We will miss you.